Hey friends, Scott Sullivan here, Georgia Baptist Discipleship with the Georgia Baptist Mission Board, and I love the topic of our today's discussion. And we've got a great panel, and just a reminder that our team exists to inspire and encourage and equip disciple makers throughout Georgia and really throughout the nation. And today I've got with me Dr. P.J. Dunn, one of my favorite people, and I call him the singles guy because in my opinion, and I haven't found anyone who differs from this, PJ, you are the nation's leading authority when it comes to singles. Now, I don't know if that means there aren't many singles people out there or what, but just kidding. But man, we love what you are doing on our team and be leading our discussion today. And Chris Shirley, Dr. Shirley is with us from Southwestern Seminary. And I can tell you this, of course, I'm done with school and not going back, but Doc, if I was going to go back, and if I was at Southwestern, I would find a way to take one of your classes. I have thought so much of you for years. You and I shared together on the Baptist Association of Christian Educators board for a while, and the respect that I've got for you, how God has used you, and what he's doing with you at Southwestern Seminary is just phenomenal. So, PJ, just before you get on and start guiding our discussion, let me just remind our folks of this. This whole thing we do is provided because churches give to the cooperative program, to the seminaries, to help the seminaries, to what we do at the state convention to get out there and to get into those local churches. So for those of you who are given to CP, thank you for doing that. It really does make a difference, particularly right now in the middle of a pandemic. And I want to encourage you to do something. Make sure and leave a comment below, because as we do every week, we're going to give away some free swag, books, products that we're going to be sending to you. So for you to get entered into that, you got to leave a comment. All right. So PJ, got us some discussion, man. We're excited about discussing our singles topic today.
Yeah, I thank you for the introduction. And I am passionate about single adults. It's not something that I try to hide too much, just because there's been a lot of things that have developed in my life over the years that have called me to this area of focus, and God has grown that. And so that's where Dr. Shirley and I first met each other, and sitting in a seminary class at Southwestern, enjoyed my time there doing very focused times of courses. And so in one of those courses, we were talking about single adults and really began to develop what a single adult was and how do you look at single adults. And oh, by the way, they're 40% of the population. And by the way, if you take the working age, they're over 50% of the population. So how do we reach this demographic in our local church and be single friendly? And so Dr. Shirley, you've been foundational in the way that I think of singles. And I don't say thank you enough, but first of all, thank you for that. And thank you for your investment. I know we've had some fun stories of me in class and all those things, but seminary professors sometimes don't always get to see students 10 years, 20 years down the road. And so I just want to say thank you, and thank you to many of your professors at Southwestern that helped invest in our lives. So
thank you, PJ. I think one of my goals in teaching is to be able to invest in the lives and ministries of my students, not just while they're here on campus, but for the rest of their ministry, for the remainder of their time in ministry, remainder of my time doing what I'm doing. I want to be on the field, helping and investing and being a part of ministry, because that helps me and keeps me fresh in understanding what's going on out there.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where seminary does really have a value, and this is one of those values where we get to walk life with each other. It's not just a class. And so today's topic is kind of on the heels of we talked about before about why you even reach singles and just why would you even think about single adults in the local church. And so we explored that topic. And so the natural progression is, okay, well, what if you had a singles group at one point, or maybe you have one, but needs to be refreshed, and there's little idiosyncrasies that we can talk about that happens in singles groups over time that we've both been a part of and serving. And then, how do we make it new, and especially in a time of a pandemic when maybe that playbook has changed completely, we go back to some core principles rather than leaning on events. And so that's what today's topic is about. And so I just want to jump right in and ask you, Dr. Shirley, for the first part of this. So if you've ever had a singles ministry, what are some tips to maybe revitalize? Like what's a 1, 2, 3 that you would say, let's revitalize our singles group? I would start here.
Okay. I think first and foremost, I think is identifying those single adults
Hmm.
within your church. Who are they? What kind of lives do they lead? Obviously, we know that they're not homogenous. And, sometimes when we think about singles, we think about young people in their 20s for starting their careers, maybe starting, on their way to getting married.
Yeah.
When in reality, I think most young people in their 20s who are in that position don't necessarily think of themselves as single. They think of themselves as just not married yet.
Mm-hmm.
And
Young
or
adult.
possibly even still adolescents. I don't know. There's some differences among the populations out there, particularly in the millennials. But
Yeah, so that would be step one.
I
So
think
we're
step one would be identifying who those people are,
okay.
and then after we find those people, identify them, then go on a discovery of who are the leaders among these people. Who are people who have leadership skills, who have gifts that might be able to be used to coordinate, organize, reach out to others. Those are two important steps, I think. Identify and then look for leaders, because we can't go forward without that.
Yeah, and I think sometimes looking at the past, so you might ask the question, "How did we get here?" In the middle of those two questions, and you know that we've been a part of revitalizing a couple singles ministries even
Mhm.
together, and so when you walk down that path and you ask, "Well, how did we get here?" And sometimes that how we got there is important to how do we not get back there? How do we build trust again? Because trust has been broken
Yeah.
in a lot of these singles groups where they thought they had support maybe and they didn't have support. 50% of people will be married at some point in their life. And so the reality is if you have 100 singles in your group, 50 of them will most likely get married and not be in the group. And so it's a group where you're constantly fishing
Mhm.
to reach people. And then now I'm going to ask you this question. What do you do with a group that maybe exists right now, but maybe is full of some interesting characters? Do you want to talk about interesting single adults a little bit?
Do I want to talk about interesting single adults? Absolutely. I think that you'll find a variety of different types of people in your single adult population in your church, and it's I almost hate to say this, but I'll say it anyway. Some people in your group are single for a season, and some are single for a reason.
Yeah.
And I think we've discovered that. I'm not trying to be derogatory toward them, only to say that I believe one of the most important functions that we can play as leaders in a church is to provide examples, provide mentoring to help people to move through this stage in their life, which may be a permanent stage, but we're about discipling, we're about building relationships, and the more we can help our single adults to attain those relational skills with one another. That's why it's so important that we have community in our church among them.
Mm.
And then we bring in leaders who model for them. I remember the first time I stepped into my role as a single adult minister, which, by the way, was not a set aside role in the church. It was just a part of what I did. And I went into that to that room. Everybody was standing on the edges of the room. They were all they were all huddled. Now, a few of them were talking to one another, but they were all in a dark room, and they were just kind of like standing around like a seventh grade dance.
Yeah.
And in middle school, and so I looked around and said, I got some work to do here.
Yeah.
And but my immediate thought was, well, I guess I'm going to need to show them how to relate to one another.
Mm.
And so just week by week, I was going around, I was talking to them and said, come over here and meet so and so. Did you know that and I try to connect people that had similar interests and life situations, and just kind of modeled what does it mean to reach out to people,
Yeah.
and to share your life with them, and so that's
Yeah.
one way I
And
did
all
that.
of that is a really big part of revitalizing, because you have
Yeah.
to realize what the needs are in the room, especially if you have an existing core group. You may have to hit that reset button and start with the relationships,
Mm-hmm.
and how do we have relationships? And being complete in Christ doesn't mean that you get married, we use a phrase called, marriage isn't the finish line. Marriage isn't the
Yeah.
goal of what we're trying to do in this group. It's Christ. It's being complete in Him, and it's powerful. But that's what helps those relationships. And so it's not about them dating one another or getting fixed or, well, if we can get this person, they won't be odd. Well, marriage ministry has just as many odd people. They just happen to marry one another. So it's not that people
Yeah.
are more odd. It may feel more concentrated. I think we could all agree that sometimes those concentration of interesting characters or single for a reason people sometimes can offset the balance. But
Yeah, and I think too those people, if we put that in quotes, exist everywhere.
Yeah.
It's just more identifiable, I think, in the single adult population because they're alone.
Yeah.
And they can't be deluded by their partner, or you can't have the introvert who's hidden by the extrovert wife, or husband. That's who you are, and you stand alone as you are in the community.
So speaking of community, tell me a little bit about, do you think there are specific discipleship considerations for singles? When we say that and we're talking about, how do we do this going forward? Are we going to be age graded? Are we going to be, affinity based or whatever it looks like? Do you think there are any considerations to think of for singles?
My own personal thoughts about disciple making tend to be more generic in terms of, I think discipling is discipling, regardless of whether you're discipling a married person, a single person, young, old. I think we have some basic disciple making that is common to every age group and every status. But then within those statuses, if that's the right word, it looks a little qualitatively different, because we're probably doing more mentoring among the single adult population who are younger. And so that's an aspect of disciple making that may not be quite as present in the married groups.
Yeah, and access to do those things, because when you are looking for a mentoring relationship, you have one person with one decision if they're going to do it. In a married environment, you have two decisions to be made, or maybe kids that are involved. It's much harder to mentor in that marriage family environment of busyness, where with a single adult, they can make one decision and they make more time. They don't have more time. That's not what we're saying. Nobody write that in the chat. But they can maybe easier engage that mentoring relationship.
Yeah. And finding that role in ministry is absolutely essential as soon as you can, I think, because like you said, there's not this extra time that people have that you don't have when you're married. I mean, it's that you don't have when you're married. I guess it's directing them in their passions, and helping them manage that time well, to be able to give all that they can give for what they're capable of giving. Because the community of Christ is going to be so much more important and vital to their lives as single adults. We tend to think that we can just let adults be adults and manage themselves. And so PJ and I both have found over the careers of our single adult ministries that unless you have someone who is coordinating and organizing, whether it be a small church or a large church, it could be a staff position, but it could just be a leader that you have in your church who has a passion for single adults. Let them lead, give them responsibility, and have a point person who is guiding this ministry. Because otherwise, just leaving it up to osmosis, and hoping they'll get it somehow, because after all, they're adults, right? It doesn't happen.
No, and you're never going to drift towards anything you didn't aim, and we learned that in Spark. So hashtag SparkCon shout out. But it is true. Like I think of, and you may know her, Sandra Rhine is a lady who has invested in singles, but never had that official capacity, and did great things for singles in North Carolina. If she's watching or somebody knows her, we can give her a shout out, because I learned from her early on in my early 20s from seeing her example of, you're not paid to do this. So if you show up and say, I have to be a singles minister and we have to staff it, this is maybe somewhere for you to speak into it, Scott. If you can't staff for it, or if you can't intern for it, what does a church do to empower that leader to make them feel like a Sandra is, who we know led a group of 100 something singles and did retreats and great things? How do you staff that as a minister?
Well, I can tell you this, how important it is, like from the church that I came from, First Baptist Halton, Louisiana. When you want singles to be a priority, that's got to start with a pastor. The pastor's vision for having a singles ministry and for it being legit is important. Now, as that filters down and you get into where most people are, you don't have a paid full-time singles minister, is equipping them. So spending time with that person so that singles minister or director who's leading that ministry understands the vision of the pastor and can flesh that out with the singles. But also, one thing that was huge for us is for that person who's working intimately and daily with those singles to give insight to the pastor who's not working with them every day and doesn't understand every single idea that's happening. And one thing I would just say for those of you who are watching, if you're a local church leader, celebrate singles in your church. We have a Mother's Day, we have a Father's Day, we have marriage conferences, we have a family series that we're doing. Have a singles day where you're celebrating them. And a lot of times I think we have this unspoken thought that, well, there are more married people than non-married. There, all these other things. But listen, when you're talking about 40 to 50% of the people who live in your ministry area are single, and they're just not going to come to your church if they don't see that you have a vision for us. So, I can say a whole lot more, PJ. I don't want to monopolize this discussion, but just a huge topic as we talk about getting this into the local church through the pastor into that lay leader.
I think one thing too that we need to be aware of is with the influx of boomers that are in their older adult years now as single adults. We need to be paying attention to them as well. There's a huge population of single adults who are over 55, over 60 years old now that aren't represented in the church and are not being paid attention to. PJ knows of the singles ministry at Wedgwood that we have for our I think we call it elite singles now. It's that age group that with mostly women, but we still have men, and probably, again, that's probably one of the biggest populations not being reached right now is older adult men who are single, and they're going to be attracted through relationships, through friendships, through connections in the church, not just fun activities.
And when people hear that age demographic, one of their first things is, well, they all must be divorced or they're all widows. But 64% of singles have never been married. 64%. And so that you walk into the room and most likely they aren't what you think that is, or they're a single mom, or they might be those things. But statistically, that's not who's going to be in the room. It's going to be another person that may or may not be like you if you've never been married or if you're not one of those life stages. So you have singles, you have people that are engaged, you have people that are looking to date, you have single parents, which make up 40% of our families, and you have widows, which in this season of COVID is something that we need to really be looking at, because if we have over 200,000 people that have passed away, how many of those left a widow or a widower behind? And that's not going to be a 60-year-old. That's going to be somebody that's much younger. And statistically, we're going to see that number is going to be around 49 for the average age for a widow. And so that it's really changes your paradigm of who singles are, because you might think, the person that's not married yet. And it's so not what the demographic is. And so we have the joy of helping communicate that. And so a question on that really is, how does the church value singles and be single friendly? Dr. Shirley, we've kind of alluded to it a few times, but just what would you say to that?
I think one thing that we can do, and I'll speak out of my own experience here. One of the goals that we had in creating a new group at our church, a new missional community, was to cross not only the age brackets, but also the stage brackets as well. And so in my missional community, we have younger couples who are in their 30s, along with couples who are in their 60s. And now we also have single adults, who are across the age groups, people in 30s, 40s, and 50s, who are single adults who are part of our missional community as well. And we're learning about each other. We're ministering to each other. We're having friendships, amongst the stages of life with single adults. So I think part of it is recognizing not only those who need and want to be a part of a group, and having those groups available for them, but also recognize the ones that maybe don't want to be a part of that group, but want to be a part of a more diverse community, and having avenues within our group ministry for them as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important that we know that singles need community, but that does not mean that we have to have a singles ministry. And so one thing that we have to destigmatize is that we have to have a singles ministry that plays volleyball, or else we're not doing singles ministry. That's not the case. That may have been the case in the 90s. And Scott probably can attest to this too. When we talk about when singles was in its heyday, or when it was really great, or people think back on it, it really was the 90s, and a lot of churches had it, and we even took it off the ACP as a question back in the 90s, when we decided it wasn't as important of a statistic to carry anymore. And so, what are some ways, Scott, at your last church in Houghton, what are some ways that maybe singles gathered? Dr. Shirley's environment is, not necessarily affinity based, but just, people come together, which is great. And then there might be like age graded or not, but how did you find that singles connected at Houghton?
Well, several two that I would share with you. And before I get in, let me just say one thing that kind of bounces off what Dr. Shirley said. Budget alignment is important. So if we're gonna say that ministry is important, then we've got to give something. Then when people look at the budget for our year, they're going to see what's important by what we are putting money towards. And that doesn't mean a lot. You got a $10,000 overall budget, man. What if it's $50? What if it's $100? But something that speaks to that. So, but in ways that that singles could gather, one of those that we would see would be simple. I guess one of my failures in that was to try to think that if I could do something super big and grand, that's what would draw the singles. That's what would get them in the door. So we would have the banquets, and we'd spend several $1,000s and a speaker and decorate, and we did get them in there. But one thing we saw over about a decade was we got just as many people by providing quality opportunities for them to get together at a Friday night at somebody's house and just play board games and just hang out. And it was really part of an overall shift that we saw in our church, where we moved from being an evangelistic church to what we called a disciple-making church. So we stopped doing so many big events and tried to do more smaller events that were focused on relational engagement. So instead of the big event where you try to get 100 people there, we tried to get maybe the 30 core people to invite 2 or 3 people and make it a smaller event. And we still had 100 people there. Yeah. But we spent $2,000 less on the event. And when they got saved and connected with the church, we went from a 26% engagement of new members to 86%. I mean, it was night and day, and it was really just a philosophy shift.
Yeah. Dr. Shirley, same question. What are some things that you've seen?
Well, I'll piggyback off something Scott just said. I think what we found with particularly with our older group, that what you just talked about, that regular time together, that was the catalyst for bringing people into the community, and then they would invite them to the Sunday morning experience. Then they would be able to pull them into their ministry, ongoing ministry initiatives that they were doing. And so it was kind of like a stepping stone process that they were using to assimilate people into the body, and it was working. And I think with the same way with the younger ones as well. One thing that I want to mention, though, that we haven't talked about is the cultivation of the church as family, particularly in a smaller church, which I think some of our viewers are going to be a part of in one staff churches, that sort of thing, where they don't have the ability to spend a lot of resources and a lot of time themselves on this. If they're identifying strong leaders, those leaders are then seeking out those single adults, and then seeking to try to find a way to integrate them within the community, within the body, finding ministry places, finding groups for them, finding ways to build relationships and friendships among different ages and stages of life. Because ultimately, in a smaller church, they've got to find a place to belong, and they need to feel needed. Mm-hmm. And so I'm a big proponent in our family ministry area of I guess reviving maybe within the church the importance of our extended family within the body.
Yeah.
And I think building that spirit, and building that mechanism of bringing people in, giving them a place to belong, finding a place to serve, and then finding the friendships necessary to hold on to that community.
Well, and I want to say a quick word, and then Scott, we'll have you wrap it up here. But first thing is that if you haven't made a comment yet, maybe you can count the number of books on the second floor of Dr. Shirley's library and write that in the comments, and that will get you some swag. But being single friendly doesn't have to cost you a thing. It doesn't have to cost you a new program. It doesn't have to be an event. Using even terms family ministry or single adults or whatever the terminology you land on, singles just want to know that they're welcome. They want to know that when you're speaking to them, Pastor, that you know they exist. And that's the same thing, a male, a female, a married couple, a young adult, senior adults, they want to know that you're speaking to them. And so we do it really well in a lot of ways. And Pastor communicates well on a lot of topics, but just adding in a little phrase into what they're already saying in singles here, and just throwing that in once a month does a world of difference for your church being single friendly. It's as easy as a few words. And so we want to encourage single pastor churches to think that it's really that simple. And if you can find a leader, why not partner with a couple churches in the area to do a singles gathering once a month? There's no harm in that. And community is huge for singles. And even during COVID, we find that singles are trying to find ways to be together, to continue dating if they're looking at dating, and finding those things. And so let's enable that. Let's set them free. Maybe they just need to hear that that's okay to go hang out with singles from those other areas, because there's going to be more rural areas where maybe that doesn't happen, and singles do want to be around one another. And we're working with a pastor that's on our team, Scott, and he's trying to figure that out in Moultrie, Georgia, and trying to figure out how do we connect singles in the area from all these life stages and do that. So I know it's about time for us today, but refreshing your singles ministry, revitalizing it, starting to focus on it, is all things that everybody on this panel has done and has been firsthand with, and we would love to help you with that. So if you want to write in the comments, we'll be following along and we can reach out more. And just again, another thank you, Dr. Shirley, for your investment in thousands of students at this point, easily, that you've been able to share those truths that we've talked about today and many others to try to impact our local churches. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
That's right. And friends, if you are feeling that sense of singles ministry, that you need to do more, that you need to start or enhance what is happening at your church, let me encourage you to do it. Don't wait till tomorrow. Start today. Start having those conversations. And here in Georgia, we've got studs like Dr. P.J. Dunn who can help you with that, because that's really why we exist, is to resource, inspire, and encourage disciple makers, and to really help churches get healthy in the area of discipleship. If you're in that Fort Worth area, go by and take Dr. Chris Shirley to lunch, give him a $100 bill, and let him share with you all of the wisdom and wealth of knowledge that he has. And so, Dr. Shirley, thank you for being on here with us today. We know you have an incredible schedule of what you're doing at Southwestern Seminary. So thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you for your years of friendship with us. And PJ, thank you for guiding our discussion. And folks, we'll see you soon.